Gregory and Michelle Williams lived in Keller, Texas. To an outsider, they might have seemed like a couple who had been married for many years, but the reality was quite different. They had only been married for 4 years, and both had been married twice before. Michelle had a daughter and 2 sons, while Gregory had a daughter. Born in Dallas, Texas, Michelle grew up with her younger sister Laura. However, she experienced her first major shock early in life when her mother, in search of a better life, left her and her sister behind, abandoning their father. As a result, the girls were raised by their father, a man who struggled to make ends meet through construction work. Raising 2 young girls alone was no easy task. Michelle had her first child at 18 and married for the second time at 24, but neither marriage lasted long. Facing a difficult life, she began working as a stripper to make ends meet, sometimes juggling 2 jobs at once. Gregory, on the other hand, grew up in a disciplined family and was a successful businessman who had earned everything through his own hard work. Gregory and Michelle's story began in mid-2007 in an online chat room. Shortly afterward, they met in person at a local club, and a deep connection quickly formed between them. Before long, they decided to get married and welcomed a daughter, Michaela, who soon became the center of their world. Both felt incredibly lucky to have found each other and seemed to be living their dream life. Financially, they were doing well, living a luxurious lifestyle in a sprawling 5-acre estate. They both loved to have fun. Michelle's children from her previous marriages visited her regularly, but over the years, their relationship had weakened. They were troubled by their mother's constant marriages and her tendency to be involved with people who seemed to offer more. It didn't help that Michelle appeared to have forgotten her past life. They also didn't get along well with their stepfather, Gregory. Despite his attempts to be kind, the children saw him as an arrogant man. By 2011, the Williams family decided to open a yogurt shop named Blueberries. One of the reasons for this venture was to sustain their lavish lifestyle, as their current income was only enough to cover their credit card debts. Their new business quickly became successful, and they began planning to build a new home, their dream house. Everything seemed perfect until the morning of October 13th, 2011.
That come 911, where is the emergency? You don't know where you are? Take a deep breath. What happened? What happened, ma'am? 18 Temptation Avenue? What's going on?
Somebody was in my house.
Your husband was shot in the head? We've got an ambulance coming to you as well, okay? Did this happen in the house? What happened to your dog? So he did it to himself? No.
I don't know. I got hit really hard.
You were hit in the head? Where's your daughter now?
She's on the couch.
She's asleep on the couch? How old is she? You don't know how hard to hit you?
No.
Okay, do you know what you look like? Is there a male and female?
Michelle, who had been in a deep sleep in the living room, said she was awakened by a loud banging sound and tried to make sense of what had happened. Fortunately, their daughter Michaela was unharmed by the incident, and the other children were not home. Michelle then walked toward the bedroom. As she walked down the hallway, an intruder struck her in the face, causing her to fall and briefly lose consciousness. When she regained her senses, she ran to the bedroom and found her husband had been shot in the head. She immediately called 911 for help. When the police arrived, they found Michelle crying on the porch. They thoroughly searched the property and the backyard, looking for any possible escape routes the killer might have used. Within an hour, the house was filled with detectives and forensic analysts. In Michelle and Gregory's bedroom, there was a door leading to the backyard, and near it, the police found a .45 caliber handgun. Beside the gun were a bullet casing and a wrench, believed to have been used to incapacitate Michelle. However, there were no signs of forced entry or evidence that anything had been stolen. In fact, $20,000 set aside for their new home was found in the bedroom during the search, a sum that was hard to overlook. Michelle's account to the police didn't match the scene at all. Detectives began forming theories that her story was not telling the truth. Michelle had a bruise on her face but no other visible injuries. Her hair was perfectly styled, which seemed odd for the middle of the night. Moreover, there were no fingerprints on the gun, the wrench, or the door where the intruder had supposedly entered. All the neighbors' security cameras were reviewed, but there was no sign of any new vehicle in the area. Only a delivery driver was spotted late at night. The driver was contacted and interviewed at dawn, and he was quickly cleared from the investigation. As the detectives followed the leads, Michelle was brought in for questioning at the police station. Michelle stuck to her story about an intruder, but the detectives began asking her how such an intruder could have entered the house without leaving a single fingerprint. The interrogation lasted 5 hours. Michelle insisted on her innocence, sticking firmly to her story. However, under intense questioning, Michelle eventually changed her account and offered a completely different version of events. I went to bed at 1 a.m. and Gregory was still awake. He had taken at least 3 Tylenol that afternoon. Around 3 a.m., Michaela came into our room. I got up and lay on the couch with her. Gregory was still awake. I asked if he needed anything, and he said he wanted to be left alone and wasn't feeling well. I was sitting with Michaela on the couch, and after 4 a.m., I woke up to the sound of a gunshot. I immediately ran to the bedroom and found that Gregory had shot himself in the head. Naturally, I panicked and didn't want Michaela to find out what had happened. So I began to clean up. I wiped Gregory's right hand with wet wipes and then dried it with a blanket and toilet paper. I placed the items by the back door. Then I opened the back door and called 911, making it look like a break-in. I went to the laundry room, took a screwdriver, and forced the back door slightly before leaving the screwdriver next to a jar. All the while, Michaela was still asleep. I didn't want her to know that her father had taken his own life. According to Michelle's statement, her only goal was to protect her daughter and herself. However, in doing so, she had provided false information and concealed the true nature of the events. After nearly 5 hours of interrogation, Michelle Williams was released and left the police department with a friend. Still, she remained the prime suspect and was placed under strict surveillance, with her movements closely monitored. The next day, Michelle visited her lawyer and wrote a check for $18,000 from her husband's business account. Although it was assumed this money would be used for the funeral, Michelle had different plans. She didn't plan the funeral, nor did she even attend it. Instead, she decided to take a trip. She went on a journey to Grapevine, Texas, with all her children, hoping to escape the memories and clear her mind. After returning from the trip, she shopped for Halloween, attended various sporting events, and showed no signs of mourning. She sold the blueberries from the yogurt shop online for $50,000, deciding she no longer wanted to be in that business. Relentless in her pursuit of money, Michelle then set her sights on Gregory's former business, selling his client list, built up over years, for $88,000. 28 days after the murder, Gregory's autopsy results were released. The medical examiner discovered something unexpected. Gregory had not shot himself that night. His blood contained a high dose of sleeping pills. Furthermore, the report indicated that the bullet had struck his head from a distance of about 12 inches, a shot unlikely to be self-inflicted. With the necessary evidence gathered, police arrested Michelle Williams on January 9th. She was charged with evidence tampering, filing a false police report, and involvement in Gregory's murder. Her bail was initially set at $500,000, but Michelle's attorney managed to have it reduced to $85,000, and she was released a week later. Michelle's attorney, Kenneth, had actually been Gregory's lawyer for a long time and had also represented him in his divorce from his previous wife. Many saw this as a significant conflict of interest. Kenneth, however, argued that his relationship with Gregory was purely professional, with no personal connections. Once released, Michelle took steps to claim her husband's $150,000 life insurance policy. Interestingly, this policy had been created just 2 months before Gregory's death. Michelle demanded the money from the insurance company, making her intentions quite clear. Michelle had also jokingly told her nephews, Trace and Tyler, that she would kill Greg, collect the insurance money, and then move to Mexico. However, the insurance company quickly reviewed Michelle's background and discovered that the murder was still under investigation. What Michelle had overlooked was the crucial fact that Greg's death was not considered an insurable event because it was classified as a suicide, and therefore, the company refused to pay. Michelle later changed her name to Shelley Williams and soon began a new relationship. This new man was Gene Wallace, a much younger former bodybuilder and personal trainer. Gene was also a close friend of one of Michelle's children, suggesting their relationship wasn't as new as it appeared.
I'm disgusted by him because Gene was my brother and I's friend. And once he got involved in my family and started sleeping with my mom and then trying to become father to my 4-year-old little sister, that's when I just started hating him.
All of this happened just a few months after Gregory's death, and the couple began living together, starting a fitness business. Nicknamed the Black Widow, Michelle wore loose clothing to conceal her electronic ankle monitor and avoided being seen by old friends. As the trial date approached, she was careful to maintain a different image from her past self. She no longer dressed as if she were going to a club and avoided any attention-grabbing behaviors. Meanwhile, the prosecutors were frustrated by the lack of concrete evidence to directly link her to the murder. The only lead they had was the cleaned crime scene. Because there was no gunpowder residue on Michelle's hands, they couldn't definitively prove she had pulled the trigger, but they were determined not to give up. On October 9, 2013, Michelle was offered a plea deal. Under this deal, she would be charged with evidence tampering but not with murder, likely resulting in a much shorter prison sentence than life imprisonment. Michelle accepted the deal without hesitation. However, just days after accepting, she retracted her statements during a private prison interview, claiming she was innocent of all charges.
But the hours go so slow. You're sitting there looking at 4 walls, thinking about your friends and family.
She stated that her reason for accepting the plea was her desire to reunite with her daughter Michaela. She didn't want to be separated from her for the rest of her life. Shortly after this conflicting statement, Michelle announced she was pregnant with twins. This news drew significant attention, as it suggested that her relationship with Gene had been ongoing for much longer than it seemed. At the hearing on January 30, 2014, Michelle's attorney Kenneth took the floor and announced that his client was no longer pregnant, claiming she had suffered a miscarriage. However, those close to her did not believe this, suspecting it was just a tactic to delay the court proceedings. In the prosecution's opening statement, they argued that the bruise on Michelle's face was not caused by a wrench, but was a result of a fight with Gregory. They also claimed that the couple's finances were not as strong as they appeared and presented a compelling witness. Capital One, the mortgage lender, testified that the couple's loan application for their new house had been falsified. They had claimed to have an average balance of $150,000 in their accounts, but in reality, they only had $10,000. These figures had been manipulated for fraudulent purposes. The prosecution argued that the motive for the murder was Michelle's insatiable greed. They suggested she had killed Gregory to get the insurance money. The defense team, however, presented an entirely different theory. They argued that Gregory had been erratic and had used steroids at times. They claimed Michelle had no reason to kill him, as he provided her with significant financial benefits while alive. Gregory was more valuable to Michelle alive than dead. Defense attorney Clay did not deny that the crime scene had been staged, but he insisted there was a logical explanation. Michelle had reacted to the situation by trying to protect her child from the traumatic sight. In their closing arguments, the prosecution described Michelle as a cold-blooded murderer who had repeatedly lied about the case. Another strange event came up in court. According to Michelle's sister-in-law, Michelle had killed her husband, Bryn, in 2010. Bryn's death had been ruled a suicide, but his wife believed Michelle was the real culprit, as he knew how Gregory's money was being spent. Bryn's body was found beside a lookout tower on Highway 34, inside a company truck. Michelle had collected signatures for Bryn's cremation, a move considered suspicious since his wife had been adamantly against cremation. There were also peculiar details about the gunshot wound in Bryn's death. The bullet wound was on his right eye, suggesting he had been shot with his right hand, but Bryn was left-handed, which made no sense. Later, the medical examiner concluded that the bullet wound was in the center of his forehead, strengthening the possibility of suicide. Ultimately, Bryn's tragic death was determined to be a suicide, and the investigation was closed following Michelle's trial. After 7 hours of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict within 2 days, and justice was finally served. Michelle Williams was sentenced to 60 years in prison for evidence tampering and could be eligible for parole at the age of 74. Michelle's daughter, Michaela, is currently around 14 or 15 years old and lives with her grandparents. Michelle's other children have no contact with their mother. Andrew revealed in a Facebook post that he testified against her.